So the verse we wanted to spend all our time discussing today is verse 5. A woman shall not wear anything that pertains to a man, nor shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all who do so are an abomination to the Lord your God. I gave a bit of the context because this section of Deuteronomy is a mix of different kinds of laws. Some laws we've seen have more of a moral component. Some have what we might see as a judicial component for civil society and laws. And some have a ceremonial component connected to Christ. And some might say, well, there are laws that we don't keep anymore, like you shall not wear two types of thread in the same garment. So why would we even pay attention to this verse, seeing as it comes in this portion of Deuteronomy? So the first thing we need to figure out is whether this verse seems more likely to be ceremonial, judicial, or moral. Now this verse doesn't seem to be ceremonial because nothing in it is pointing to temple or priesthood or ritual worship. It's not talked of in terms of purity laws and regulations. It doesn't seem to foreshadow Christ's priestly or sacrificial work. But instead, it seems grounded in the created order and God's character. When in the law terms like abomination are used, those are usually moral terms, not ceremonial terms, referring to something that is right or wrong in God's sight. Secondly, it doesn't seem to be judicial. There's no civil penalties meted out. There's no courtroom processes given for this particular law. It seems more like it's treated like a personal sin, something about personal conduct and piety like we would see in the Ten Commandments. What we can say about this verse is that it seems to be an application of the moral law. An application of the moral law that's rooted in created order, where both male and female, Genesis 1:27 says he created them. Our confession in chapter 4.2 says the same. Male and female, he created them. Now, the first thing to note here is that this text uses the terms man and woman as the two basic categories of humanity, the two sexes. Male and female, he created them. There is such thing as a man's and a woman's way to be. Now, that doesn't mean there are not sometimes confusing issues in society based on genetic abnormalities. There are various what are called intersex conditions where the biology is not totally clear. But that is not some third category. That's different sorts of abnormalities or mixes from what is to be expected. And each of those cases are very different and need to be navigated case by case. But it's the issue of clothing here that's interesting. The writer takes it as culturally given that there is something to wear that pertains to a man, and there is something like a woman's garment. Now, he doesn't say that this is the way it has to be. This is not a prohibition against any sort of androgynous clothing as some have taken it. I've heard some teach us that this is the reason why women ought to wear skirts or dresses and man ought to wear something else. It doesn't say that as a statement of the fact that this is the way it ought to be, but it says to not take on the clothing of another. Now, in many ancient Near Eastern cultures, the actual clothing men and women wore was more similar than even ours today. They all wore tunics. And really, the only major difference generally was that a male tunic was often shorter to give them more mobility for the types of work they did. Now, there's no objective standard of what is a divinely given male or female type of clothing, right? Are not kilts the manliest skirts in history. But the issue here is intentionally wearing clothing that is culturally understood to be distinctly gendered, right? No one has any issue that all astronauts wear the same type of spacesuit. That's a given for their field. It's not wrong for both men and women to wear jeans or t-shirts, but the real question we need to grapple with is the why. Why would someone choose to take on the clothing and appearance of a distinctly gendered look? Well, historically, one common reason for what we might call cross-dressing is something that's often referred to as autogynephilia. Autogynephilia, which is the sexual attraction to the idea of oneself as the other sex. The attraction to the idea of oneself as the other sex. And historically, this has mostly been males dressing as females, either for their own personal pleasure, or it could be done for the pleasure of others, like in the practice of drag. Now, we know that biblically all sexual pleasures disconnected from a spouse in a God-honoring marriage are to be mortified, and those desires trained in a biblical direction. That's one basket of cases. But perhaps the more significant basket of cases, the broadest one, is the real core issue, I think, is a desire to take on the garments of another for the purposes of assuming the social role of the other. The purpose of any sort of physical transition in most cases, at its most basic, whether it's clothing or more extreme hormones or surgeries, these physical transitions are for the purpose of social transition. Medical and physical changes are not pursued as an end in themselves, but as a way of making the person's appearance and body cohere with the gender identity they want society to acknowledge. So social transition most often begins with clothing, hairstyles, pronouns, and names. These are external markers by which society might read someone's gender, as it were. Now, in this sense, cross-dressing is not just about personal preference, but it functions as a signal to others to say, treat me as male, or treat me as female. The physical modifications are typically pursued to make the social signals more convincing. This is often referred to as the term passing, to be able to pass as the other gender, to be seen as such by society. Now, this underscores why this verse in Deuteronomy 22:5 is relevant, because clothing is not neutral. It communicates and it participates in presenting gender identities. The abomination here considered is not the fabric, but it's the intentional denial of God's created distinction of male and female through social signaling. Thus, physical transition exists to underwrite a social transition, but both are aimed at redefining the self against God's created order. And more than being a denial of God's created order, it's a form of deception that desires others to believe something which is at root untrue, or at worst to pressure others to affirm something they know to be untrue. This denial and deception runs contrary to the creational and moral will of God. Now, that understood, it's very important for us to also further acknowledge the reasons why someone might pursue this desired outcome in the first place. It's not likely that they just want to blaspheme the created order and shake a high-handed fist at God. It might be, probably not. But in a fallen world, there are various ways that people experience the effects of the fall. And one of them is a psychological condition known as gender dysphoria. And in gender dysphoria, it's where one experiences negative emotions that stem from their biological sex. And the reasons for this can be varied. It can be various reasons, but they do result in experiences of profound discomfort for these people, even deep pains relating to their sexed self and the perception of that self in the world. This is often exacerbated at puberty, where sexual differentiation intensifies. And we really ought to have compassion for people who have these types of conditions, to have a tenderness towards them in their plight, to hear from their experience, because this is the symptom of a fallen world calling for healing. The difference is that biblically, we do not agree with the world that social transition is the God-given solution to this pain, even though some might say that in some cases it alleviated it for them. For when the internal sense of self doesn't match the external self, usually the call is to do internal work, to bring your internal self into alignment with the givenness of your ontological reality, to eventually even come, God willing, to delight in the body and the social sexual identity he's given you. Now, it's a hard line for us to walk, one that stands firm against the world's proposed solutions and acceptances, while at the same time showing care and concern for those who experience pains that might be different from our own. Would God help us to always speak the truth in love? Let's go to the Lord in a time of prayer.